And okay.
Энтони, я уже довольно давно наблюдаю за тобой. Позволь мне задать тебе несколько вопросов.
What?
Расскажи, пожалуйста, немного о себе. Я знаю, что ты родился в Шри-Ланке и начал свой музыкальный путь как барабанщик. У тебя музыкальная семья. Кто привил тебе интерес к музыке?
So I'm from Sri Lanka, but I'm born and raised in Bahrain, which is in the Middle East. Um, Music was never in the family, never at all. Um, but I always liked drums as a baby in the church, you know. So eventually, when I was 12 years old, I was able to play a few beats, and then I played in the church band a little bit. So it started in church for me. We used to play a lot of gospel music, a lot of the American stuff. So I grew up playing a lot of that, and then eventually, through my friends and my brother, I started listening to heavy metal. So I started listening to Metallica, Pantera. I love that stuff till today. So there was two things happening, and I was playing guitar in the heavy metal stuff, you know. So there was gospel, and then there's heavy metal. So that's what I grew up with. And then eventually, years later, I found out that because my father is a Hindu and my mother's a Christian, but my father's side, his great grandfather, he used to be a musician in the temple. So I guess that's where I get it from because nobody else in my family plays anything. None of my cousins, nobody. So it's just me, um, which is a little strange because you feel very alone. But yeah, that's how it started for me in church, and then on the side, the metal stuff, and yeah, started with the drums.
Как ты начал играть на бас-гитаре? Как ты пришел к басу? Я знаю, что ты мультиинструменталист и играешь также на барабанах, фортепиано, на гитаре. Какое место среди всех этих инструментов занимает для тебя бас? То есть бас-гитара в приоритете, а все инструменты отходят на второй план? Или все инструменты, которыми ты владеешь, равны для тебя?
Right. Okay, I like that question. So I went to music college as a guitar player, and when I entered college, I quickly realized there's too many guitar players, too many. Um, and no one had anything special going on because there's just too many, you know. And I used to play a little bass, and then people used to call me to play for their recital because there was only like in the college there was only like three bass players and at least 60 guitar players, you know. So like, okay, the balance is very bad. So I used to play a lot of bass. I was playing it so much that I stopped playing the guitar. And then the bass teacher said, "Hey, why don't you major in the bass?" And I thought, yeah, maybe why not? You know, and it started to feel more natural. I like this, the weight, the size of the instrument, and the function in the band. So as soon as I started playing the bass, I completely stopped playing the guitar because they're so different, even though they look the same. But I still kept playing drums. However, till today, I always tell anybody I consider myself mainly a bass player, um, purely purely out of respect to anybody who plays guitar or drums. But over the years, I've spent more time trying to bring my guitar playing and drumming to the same place as my bass playing. But still, I'm a stronger bass player than a drummer and guitar player. But I'm trying to push it naturally, you know, not trying to force it. Um, but that's how I did my first album, and I'm doing my second album the exact same way, where I'm playing everything. But on the second album, I'm also playing piano because I spent last year practicing piano a lot. So yeah, in terms of trying to maintain playing different instruments, honestly, it's just about different technique, but the scales are the same, your chords are the same, the language is the same. You want to build everything musically, it's the same. It's just a matter of technique, which is what my teacher taught me very early on. If you get the technique, then you can figure things out. So that's kind of been the way I manage my instruments. But bass is still the main thing. However, I'm trying to others on the same level. Yeah.
Получается, что ты учился в Беркли College of Music по классу гитары, а затем перешел на бас.
I I studied at a partner college of Berkeley in Malaysia, um, because Berkeley is just too expensive. Boston is too expensive, So it's like,
I know.
so they had a program. I don't know if they still have it, where you do 2 years in Malaysia and then 2 years in Boston, so it makes it cheaper. So I entered as a guitar player for my first semester, and then the second semester I switched to bass.
Какие предметы интересовали тебя больше всего? И как это образование помогает тебе сейчас? То есть, например, помогают ли тебе знания такого предмета, как композиция, сочинять свои произведения сегодня?
Yeah. So for me, well, two things. I did not actually finish my undergrad. I dropped out of college after 2 years. That's one. But in the 2 years, my most favorite subject has to be ear training, um, which is very interesting because when I went to college, I did not know I have perfect pitch. One thing, so people started telling me, "Hey, you have perfect pitch," and I was like, "Okay, cool." I didn't know it's a big deal. But ear training taught me that no matter how good you hear, you can always train it more. So that has to be my favorite subject. And I guess my second favorite subject was the ensemble classes. Um, in particular, with my mentor and bass teacher who was teaching the ensemble classes, he really taught me how to listen to everybody and play with them, as opposed to you just playing your part and playing it correctly, but then it's not working together. Um, but even as a composer or an arranger, or when I direct any gigs or do anything, very little of it has to do with what I studied, to be very honest, because I think the biggest problem in music education is that people think, "Oh, I go to Berkeley, I do a double degree, I have a double degree in jazz composition, performance, and then I'm going to be great after 5 years." But it usually never happens, because art is not dependent on what you have on paper. If you don't have it in your mind and your soul, you can never create anything. So whatever I studied in those 2 years, I spent the next 2 years trying to forget it all. Because every time I'm playing, I'm thinking, "Oh, this chord I can play this scale," and I'm just like, "No, no, no, don't do that, don't do that." Just you play a chord. If you feel like playing that, play it, but don't think about it. So even my bass teacher told me, "Whatever you study, go home and forget about it." And I never understood it when he said that. I was like, "What is he saying?" But gradually, especially now, I really understand because I'm teaching a lot, and I tell all my students the same thing: "Hey, this is the material, practice it. But when you play or you write, close it. Don't look at it. Just that is not how you create art. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed the studying process, but I spent a lot of time unstudying it, forgetting about it. So yeah.
В 2019 году у тебя вышел сольный альбом «Road Not Taken». У Роберта Ли Фроста есть одноименное знаменитое стихотворение о выборе жизненного пути. Название твоего альбома навеяно этим стихотворением или у него другая история?
No, it's inspired by the poem. That was my favorite poem in school. When we studied in school, I like the way the poem starts, about two roads creating different paths. But I like how Robert Frost decided to take the path which nobody took. So I connect with that poem with my life, my brother's life. It inspired. So it was the poem plus my brother's life that inspired me to go with that title for the album, and the overall story behind it. It's basically, um, making it work even though it's not supposed to. There's always the right way, easy way, but sometimes life just pushes you in the other direction. So that's the story of the album, basically.
Поскольку ты мультиинструменталист, я могу предположить, что партии всех инструментов на альбоме сыграны тобой. Так ли это?
Yes, I played the guitars, bass, and drums, the keys as well, but I'm not very proud of my keys playing on that. It's quite it's going to be better this time, the second album. But and then I had a couple of my friends play some solos, some guest solos. Yeah.
Меняется ли твое мышление, когда ты берешь другой инструмент?
Absolutely, because um it's like I said, you understand the technique behind the instrument, but then the second thing is to understand the function. Because one problem I had when I started playing bass and then I wanted to play the guitar, I could not play the guitar like a guitar player would. in the sense of my sound. My touch was too heavy, you know.
Мгм.
So when I switch between different instruments, I try to change my mindset. And one thing for me I always worked on is, if I play the guitar, I want people to think I am a guitar player. I don't want them to kind of know, okay, he sounds pretty good, but I think he's a bass player. No, I don't like that. If I play drums, people should look at me and say, yeah, man, he's a good drummer. So that's how I always approached any instrument, you know. Otherwise, I would never play it, you know. So even with the piano, I just spent the whole of March just doing, you know, just nice and slow, just really getting the hang of it so I can eventually start building my technique and then sound like, you know what, okay, he's like A minus on the piano or something, you know. So um, I tried to change the mindset. Yeah. Try to approach it like the instrument has to be approached.
А сочиняешь музыку ты на гитаре или на басу?
Funny enough, actually, piano mostly. On the first album, most of the songs I wrote on the guitar, some of them on the bass. Then the upcoming album, everything, almost everything was done on the piano. Um, the piano is just the easiest instrument to write on because what you see is what you get. On the bass, it's very hard to approach it the same way, you know, because you can play the same thing in so many positions. So I resorted to using the piano a lot more this time. But generally, it depends on the idea I have. It could be a bass line, and then from there I go to the piano, or sometimes a drum groove, and then I come to the piano, and then put the bass maybe. So it depends on my mood and the direction I want to take an idea. But yeah, definitely piano more than bass or guitar.
Сейчас ты уже закончил работу над вторым альбомом или еще что-то дописываешь? И когда планируешь его выпустить?
I'm actually currently mixing the album, and it'll be sent to mastering at the end of the month. And I'm planning to release it hopefully at the end of February. So yeah, end of 28th of February. That's the date I'm looking at. Maybe a week before or later from there. But yeah, soon.
В каком стиле будет новый альбом? Это будет что-то в ключе первого альбома? Или второй альбом будет кардинально отличаться от первого по стилистике?
Quite quite different. This album is a lot heavier in terms of the sound, a lot more depth to it. Because the first one is a lot more acoustic. This one is more electric in nature. So that is one. And the compositions, a few of them I had it before, but most of them I only wrote them from last year, June. You know, so the album explores a very dark and emotional side, actually, because from I think 2019 in December, yeah, the bass player, my bass teacher, the mentor I mentioned, he passed away, and that really affected me. And then in June, July last year, I lost a few people in my life, from family to close friends to people in the church. So it really affected me a lot, quite badly, that I went again to the piano and started to try to translate it into music, you know, instead of trying to do something else about it. And that is what the album essentially is. So it kind of just went into that direction where there's more depth and heaviness to it. So it's quite different from the first. A lot of things are very different about it. I have more musicians I'm featuring on this one. Um, I even have a friend who's playing bass on one of the tracks. So it's definitely going to be fun. More tracks and yeah, quite a different vibe overall.
Сейчас твое творчество ориентировано на джаз и фьюжн музыку. Ты планируешь развиваться в этом ключе? Или, например, как Майлз Дэвис, когда проходишь какой-то стиль, он становится тебе неинтересен, и ты меняешь направление, исследуя и перебирая несколько стилей в течение своей жизни. То есть, например, показываешь с каждым новым альбомом то, что меняется у тебя внутри.
I think I am like in between. I like to I like to have something common linking my music, but in terms of overall direction, I want to change it. For instance, on this album, I have a couple of songs where there are no solos, because that is one issue with a lot of jazz albums. There's just too many solos, especially if it's a bass player's album, too many bass solos. And for me as a bass player, it's very boring, to be very honest, to listen to 10 bass solos, you know? And so that already to me is quite a shift, because now it's just a theme. Here's a theme. Okay, I'm going. That's how I'm treating the song. Because sometimes what happens is, because you're trying to make jazz or fusion, you try to think, okay, where do I put a solo? Where do I do a solo section? That's always the thought. So this time I was fighting that thought, and I realized, sometimes you just don't need to do certain things. So eventually I'm actually looking to explore on the third album, um, a lot more with singers, probably maybe a mini orchestra, right, for strings, because I've been writing for strings, and I'm just trying to explore different avenues. Still the same kind of genre, you can hear my signature, but in terms of what I use to create the sound, I'll keep changing that. That is my goal, basically. So it might not sound like, a top 40 pop song, but um, maybe I might do it, who knows. So I just try to keep an open mind that way. Yeah.
Ты предпочитаешь творить в своей домашней студии или записываешь здесь демо, а чистовой вариант собираешь на другой студии?
So on the first album, besides the drums, everything else I recorded at home. And at that time, I didn't even have a studio set up like I have now. So I went to my friend's studio to record drums. This time, I was about to do the drums again at the studio, but then I thought, I want to try at home just for fun and see what happens. So I got microphones and I tried it, and I loved it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do the entire album at home, and I'm mixing it at home as well. And to be very honest, it sounds like it's in a studio, as opposed to the first one, in which the drums sound like I recorded at home. Now it sounds like I recorded in the studio. So it's kind of like the opposite reaction. But I also think that's partially because I became a little better at producing. I started to understand a lot more, and my education, before I studied music, I did sound engineering. So that's what I studied first. So I started to dig into that, take my old notes and look at all the stuff to restudy it. So I learned and fixed a lot of the mistakes I made on the first album on the second one. But yeah, I honestly think we are at a time today with technology that you can't tell the difference anymore. What was produced in $1,000 per hour studio, or what was produced in the bedroom. This is my bedroom and studio, so I just wake up and I just record straight. So it's fun.
Расскажи, пожалуйста, немного о своей домашней студии. Как ты записываешь бас? Что ты используешь для этого?
Yeah, so I have this guy here. I think you can see that. Yeah, of course you can't see anything written on it because it's very old. This is a mark based booster. They don't sell these anymore, they don't make it anymore. So I used that as my preamp. So I have my bass going inside here, and then I have two outputs from here to my interface. The reason I have two is because one is balanced, so it is stereo, and the other one is unbalanced, mono. And sometimes I mix and match them, but that is all I do. And then sometimes there are these filters here which I turn on. You could actually hear it if I play now. It makes a small difference, but depending on the song, maybe I wanted to sound a little more round. I would change the sound here a little bit and record it that way. But most of the times, I just record it without any additional sounds. So that's how I record my bass uh, mainly now. So even if I go to another studio to do a session, I go with the same pedal, I go with the same sound. So of course, I would like to just stay home and record, but sometimes some guys say, no, 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 come to the studio. So I still take this. If I could, I'll take everything and go.
То есть ты привык именно к этому звуку, и для тебя он лучший, через маркбас.
Yeah, with this pedal, actually now recently I have stopped using amps for recording. So what you're hearing now is just my bass directly going here without any amp. I feel like it's the cleanest sound you can have, because otherwise you will have a lot of color from the amp. But yeah, because actually it's funny. I used to love Mark bass amps, but now I don't really like it because it has a certain color. But this pedal I like, so I've held on to this, and my amps is just in storage, just sitting. I'm not touching it anymore.
Сейчас я вижу у тебя новый бас, но практически на всех своих видео ты играешь на Fender Squire. Я всегда поражался, неужели Squire может так круто звучать? Ты вносил туда какие-то модификации или это серийная модель?
This is actually purely stock. The only thing I changed was this, the bridge. So this bridge, they actually stopped manufacturing a long time ago. This is Leak One, the Badass. A lot of bases have Badass too, but this is Badass One, the original, and I like the name. It's called Badass. So um, I was on eBay one day and I saw this guy in the US selling it. He didn't know what it was. He found it in his grandfather's closet. So I was just like, "Hey, how much do you want for that?" He said, "Whatever you want to pay." So I paid very little money for it and I changed it. That's the only thing I changed. Everything else is stock. And it's funny because people have this bias that if an instrument is cheap, it shouldn't sound good. But my teacher always told me sound, whether you sound good or not, it is all about how you imagine your sound. So everything has to do with your imagination. If I give this to somebody and I convince them, this is very cheap, it's a cheap thing, it's a cheap thing, it's a cheap thing, if that's how your mind works, that's how it's going to sound. So my teacher made me play this bass like it is $2 million. In my head, psychologically, every time I play it, I look at it and I think, yeah, it's a beauty. I don't treat it like it's $200. I only pay $200 for it, but I treat it like I paid 200,000 maybe. So yeah, it's purely stock. I set it up myself. I set up my instruments myself. Even the pickups, I don't even know if there is a brand name for this. It's like it's just made in China stuff. I don't know what is inside. This is the only thing I know for sure because I've changed that, and that's it. That's the base.
Какие струны ты предпочитаешь? Сейчас многие ставят эликсир из-за того, что они долго живут. Что ты выбрал для себя?
um, on the Squire, I use DR. DR. Let me think of the size: 40 to 95. So they're actually very light, and I use light strings because of my wrist injury in the past. And also I've broken both my thumbs before in school playing basketball, so I have to be very sensitive. um, but I use DR on this, and on my new custom bass, my luthier sent the bass with these strings from France, Savares, and I really like them. Unfortunately, I'm unable to buy from them at the moment, but I would love to use their strings because it feels even better than these. So yeah, DR on this, and then Savar is there, and yeah, that's what I've been using for the last on this one for the last 7 years. I think I've been using the same string company. I haven't changed.
Насколько часто тебе приходится менять струны? Потому что большинство моих друзей-басистов выбирают для себя эликсир по той причине, чтобы не менять их полгода, год, а то и больше. Потому что это довольно дорогое удовольствие менять струны часто. Но другие струны, например, тот же DR, перестают звучать очень быстро, и их приходится менять раз или два раза в месяц.
Well, technically speaking, if I want to be very particular about always having the sound of new strings, because there's a particular sound you have when your strings are new, and there's a sound when they're aged. Um, Sometimes I like a bit of both, but the problem here in Dubai is that the humidity can be so bad, especially in the summer, that honestly it'll be nice to change my strings at least once a week, to be very honest, because it can rust like so quick. But that is very expensive. That is 56 packs of strings. So um, I I usually change when I can't play them anymore, and usually I judge that from my picking finger. The minute I start to feel a little resistance, that's when I know, okay, the strings are done. You know, on this bass, I haven't changed the strings since it's been a year, but I like the sound that I have now with the dead strings, so I'm going to keep it on. So, um, yeah, I would say maybe 3 to 4 months generally I would change, even if the strings are dead. But like I said, I just wait for my finger to tell me is it dead or not completely. um, and that's how I've always done it the same way. My guitar, I don't even change that. Like, this is the same strings I've had since the time I bought it 2.5 years ago, and it still works fine. So it's like, Yeah, I'm a little weird that way, but yeah, I just go based on how my hands feel more than anything else. Yeah.
Уже несколько лет ты уделяешь большое количество времени преподаванию. Почему ты сконцентрировался именно на этом пути?
Um. So to me, it's very important and personal because I get it from. I got the importance of being able to educate from my teacher, my mentor. Um, and the funny thing is, he is somebody who retired from playing many years ago before he started teaching me. So all the lessons we did, he didn't even have the bass in his hand most of the times. He always just used words to make me understand. And he told me one thing which was very interesting. He said, every time you study something, try to imagine how you will explain it to somebody else. And then I used to think, why should I do that? He said, just do it that way. So over time, I realized I developed one particular skill from studying this way. Anything that's complicated, I can make it simple for anybody to understand. And to me, that's very important, I think, because musicians have the habit of going down a path where everything sounds complicated, looks complicated, but you still cannot play anything more. So I realized something's not right there. So I wanted to help people, and I specifically target my lessons towards musicians who can already play, people who are trying to move to the next level, basically. So people who are already gigging, who are writing, maybe I'm targeting them. Like, hey, this is what you can do to go to the next level. Um, but the main reason I started it is because I was just seeing how much of misinformation is there for bass education. You know, some guys, they will say some stuff like the most classic thing every bass player says: if you want to play fast, you have to play slow. It's like, okay, but if you want to play fast, you have to try to play fast. You know, Usain Bolt from Jamaica, he's the world's fastest man not because he ran slow. He ran fast and he got faster every time. That's how you do it. You got to just try. So I found a way of explaining things that can be very complicated but make it simple and understandable for anybody. And I decided to stick to it. And honestly, teaching helps me keep myself in check. I have to be ready to be able to answer any question anybody asks. So sometimes I have even some beginner students, they say, hey, how do I do scales? And sometimes honestly I forget what I did 10, 11 years ago. Who could remember? But it's nice because it keeps me in check. So as I teach, I also learn at the same time a lot. So I enjoy that process. I enjoy the process of being able to grow. It's like people ask me, don't you miss gigging? In 2020 there was very little gigs. I said honestly, no. I liked it. I liked the fact that there were no gigs. I had time to practice. I had time to teach a lot. And then I did a few gigs, but I felt so strong those few gigs, as opposed to playing 4 nights a week and then you feel tired. You play the weekends and stuff like that. So I realized I enjoy teaching a lot more, and gigging, I enjoy it slightly less than that. I like to play, but I rather teach more and play less because I feel that's where I feel the most confident and comfortable.
Твой канал на YouTube, пожалуй, один из самых информативных каналов по импровизации на бас-гитаре. Расскажи, сколько времени уходит на съемку видео и монтаж?
Ooh, you know, when I first started, it used to take me like 2 days to make one video because I was so bad. I would put the camera in a funny place. You can see my legs. You could see my. It's like weird, because you only play bass. You play music. You don't know anything about video. So I struggled so much my first few years. And then I think only in the end of 2019, I got these lights that I'm using right now. And then some of my videographer friends, they gave me some ideas. Hey, you know, it's funny because this is the same thing I tell musicians. Work on your basics, and you'll spend less time editing your stuff. So they said if you get the perfect shot, you don't have to edit too much. So I worked so hard on being able to do that. And the minute I started to do that, pay more attention to my environment, where I put the camera and stuff like that, it saved me half the editing time. So from 2 days now, I can shoot edit and put together the video in about 2 to 3 hours, just from being more efficient in the beginning, because I think the general mistake anybody makes with anything is not starting correctly. If your product is not starting right, there's no way you can fix it later. That's the problem with recording, recording video or audio. If it's not done right at the source, you cannot fix it. So that took me 2 years to learn. So it's been interesting, but a lot of work. It's definitely a lot of work, and especially because I do it alone. Because I know many channels, the more successful ones, they have a team, of editors, video guys, audio guys. But for someone like me, I am my team, so I have to make it work somehow, which is why I don't post too regularly. So, and that is something I'm trying to fix. That's why I even worked towards setting up a good home studio, so that I have everything set up, just put the camera and go, be ready to shoot at any time. Still working on it, but yeah, 2 days initially, and then eventually 2-3 hours. Yep.
Поговорим об импровизации.
Sure.
Как ты видишь гриф? Как ты занимался видением грифа? Я имею в виду различные лады и гаммы. Делишь ли ты гриф на различные аппликатуры, позиции и так далее? Или видишь лад целиком на грифе во всех его проявлениях?
I see the whole thing all the time. um, so one of the things I practice so much, and I talk about this on my YouTube channel, is playing scales on one string only, but not just playing it on one string, but trying to play all the scales the same way. So if I do C major, I will start from here and just keep going up, and then F major, so on and so forth, B flat. And I just kept trying to do that, because what this does is it forces you to always have the entire neck in vision. Because the problem with position is that I don't have to think anymore, and I can just keep running. So I tried to find a way that would force me to think about where my fingers are actually going. So I did the same thing with arpeggio. So if I have C major, instead of doing this, which is what everyone does, I do. Of course, it's quite annoying to play because it's so much moving. Sorry, that's C minor. So on and so forth, augmented. And what I'm trying to go for here is not speed or just getting it perfect, but I just want to be able to control where my fingers go and also have my eyes move with it, you know. So usually when I play, sometimes I might play here, and then you would see my head moves here, because I'm trying to identify where I want to go based on how I hear it. So, because people say improvising is how you hear things. It's true, but it's also how you see things. If you cannot see where you're going, nothing's going to happen. You know, I think the only instruments that can say it's all about hearing is horn or singers, woodwind, of course, because their instruments, there's no fretboard or notes to hit like that. They blow air, so it works very differently. But I liked the logic of how they practice. They just practice their scales as far down, as far up they can. But us bass players, we do C to C, and then we wrap up. We do F to F, and then finish. So I was thinking, what can I do more? So I did single strings, then I did two strings, and then three, and then all four with scales and arpeggios. And I did this 4 to 5 hours a day for 2 years at least. Sometimes I even did it for 10 hours until I would do it to the point, I can feel my stomach is empty because I haven't eaten all day. Um, but because of doing it like an idiot like this, it saves me so much time in the future. So anytime I want to play anything now, it's not difficult for me to technically find where I need to go. So as I learned to improvise, when someone said, "Hey, you got to play the arpeggio like this and then like that," it was easy for me to know where to go, even if I never thought of the idea. Why? Because the technique is taken care of by practicing it this way. That's why I tell all my students, I'm like, you don't have to do 10 hours, 12 hours like I did like an idiot, but just do it 1 hour a day, but do it like dedicate your time and do it properly, and you should be able to see the fretboard properly. Look at it like how you look at a piano, because on the piano, if I play C here, that's it. It's not the same anywhere else. But on the bass, the problem is that. And then I've seen some exercises that say, okay, play all your E's. But the problem is, I don't have context there. What do I do with this E if I don't know what to do with it? Okay, maybe I can play an arpeggio there, but it's so uncomfortable to play it here. I'd rather play it here. So I always wanted to give each and every note I practice context. That's why scales and arpeggios, it'll always win. So that's what I did that helped me visualize. Another thing I did, um, I still do this with my students. I used to draw fretboards. So I would take a piece of paper, draw the fretboard. I would think of a scale and then just map it. And then if I'm working with different chords, I will take the different scales and write the scales with different color pens. So when I do that, I can see, okay, what note is the same in what scale, what is different. So that way I can really focus on the change and then sit down with the bass, try to find it. Again, it's like what my teacher said, trying to use my imagination. That's why I put the bass, take a piece of paper, draw the fretboard, write the notes, and then just try to visualize it in my head and then sit with the bass. So these two things I think will help anybody, no matter how advanced or how beginner you are. This works perfectly with beginners too. So, yep.
Ты мыслишь ступенями или нотами?
Um, Again, interesting answer is that what I do is I always keep in mind my open strings. That's it. And then what I used to do before is I still have this. Again, I use it for my lessons. I have the scales written out on a PDF. Okay. Once I have them written out, I write them in the circle of fourths and fifths. In doing that, I can see what note changes between the scales. So if I start on G in C major, I just look at that PDF and I try to play. So I'm not trying to think in terms of numbers or notes, but I'm trying to think in terms of the way it feels under my fingers. Because if I play this, a lot of people want to do Ti do, but I'm trying to play C major. There's no F sharp. But instead of trying to memorize that or think of it in terms of numbers, I just look at this paper and I know there's an F. There's no F sharp in this scale at all. So if I play E here, I need to know that up a half is F. But then naturally your ear is telling you, no, 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 play F sharp, play F sharp. So practicing it this way, it forces you not only be aware of the notes, but also allows you to hear, which is something nobody puts into their practice because we all sit and play for the fingers. But what happens if you use your ears a little more? So if you're looking for a guidance system, I would say thinking of the notes is a little better versus numbers. Because if I did C major starting from G, that is 5, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, um, as opposed to just thinking natural notes, G, A, B, C, so that even this B with my pinky, C with the first finger, sometimes I used to just sit and practice this just so I know how it feels physically. And funny enough, this is also one of the reasons why I only played this bass, because physically I got so connected with it that I remember in 2018, I was in St. Petersburg actually. Went to a jam session at White Night, is it? White Night, yes. I played somebody's bass. I couldn't play it at all. It was a beautiful bass, but it was very customized and smaller, the neck. When I tried to play certain things, I overestimated. I would do something like this, which I know on this bass feels a certain way, but on that, I flew. I couldn't control myself. And then I realized, man, that's weird. But then I realized I'm just so used to playing this because this is the only thing I played for so many years. So I think that physical connection you find with your instrument is very crucial. So yeah, that was a good reminder to why I only played this. So even with my custom bass, I made sure it's a lot longer than usual, even though it's 24 frets, just so it feels the same way like this does. So anything I build henceforth or I buy a new one or whatever, this is going to be the reference, physically speaking. So it's definitely interesting the way it impacts your ability to improvise or just generally play. But yeah,
Объединяешь ли ты аккордовые последовательности в общие гаммы или воспринимаешь каждый аккорд как отдельный лад?
I see them as one. I see everything as one. In fact, um, what I tend to do is I would take the same C major scale and I'll play it against every chord. So, because a lot of it's funny if you go to, because I did this, if you go look on YouTube for jazz piano tutorial, what they'll teach you is you play D minor 7 and then D Dorian. But then, what if I do C major 7 instead? It not only sounds a little better, but it's less work. Why should I think of seven different scales if it's the same thing? It's like it's like you have one destination and you have seven ways to get there. Sure, it's good to know the seven, at least reference. Like when you drive somewhere, you know that place is going to have traffic at this time, so I'll go this way. But because I've heard people use this same reference with modes, but music is not about traffic. You don't have traffic at home. So I'd rather reduce the traffic, think about one thing in seven places. So I would sit and just take the same chord, same C major scale. So this is like, let's say, F major 7, and still playing C major. It sounds so much better than me doing Lydian versus the main reason it sounds the way it does is because you're always going to start on a note which is not a chord tone on downbeat. So if I have F major 7, 4 major 7 in the key of C, and I start on F, it's not as strong as starting on the C because you can already hear that note separately. So I use this philosophy everywhere. If you have, of course, some chords you have to tweak it a little bit, but then this is A minor 7 with C major scale. And I could just keep doing this because I like the way it sounds and it's simple. All I'm thinking about is just one scale against the seven chords. So I used to sit and practice my scales this way. And then you will start to realize, okay, certain chords, the way you start the scale sounds weird. If I have E minor 7 in the key of C, that C sounds funny now. So there, okay, maybe I'll tweak it. I'll start from B. But now I'm not thinking, oh, this is B Locrian. No, I just one below the C and play C major, So I forced myself to simplify the thought process because I spent so many years trying to learn modes. And the more time I spent with it, the less sense it started to make. So I was just like, yeah, I need to just kind of forget about this. So not just with major scale, even melodic minor modes. Never. I don't even know what they are actually. Because sometimes people ask, hey, what's this? What's a Lydian dominant? And I have to think. I'm like, what is a Lydian dominant? Then I'm like, oh, you mean just a melodic minor? That's it. I think I think the simpler the thought process, the more complicated your execution can be. That's generally the way I approach it. Simple stuff often leads to very strong ideas.
Я разговаривал с Эдрианом Ферро, и мы обсуждали вот такой вопрос. Сталкивался ли ты с тем, что во время твоей импровизации в аккомпанементе пианист или гитарист могут начать играть замены или альтерации аккордов? И твоя мелодическая линия уже начинает звучать по-другому. Понимаешь, о чем я? Как ты выходишь из такой ситуации? Слушаешь, что происходит, и стараешься подстраиваться под это? Или продолжаешь обыгрывать стандартную гармонию?
Okay. There's two answers to this. One is where the substitution actually makes musical sense. In that moment, if I dig it, if I dig the change, I will change my idea. Because that's what improvising is about. It's not just about being able to play what is right to against chord. If somebody's got a C major 7 and he decides to put a sharp 11, that's his choice. And it's your choice whether you want to react or not. But now, if there's a C major 7 and all the time the piano player is playing F sharp, I will ignore it, because now it is not a substitution, because now he's just doing it because his hands are just used to playing it the same way. So very early on, I learned to identify from an accompanist point of view who plays with intention and because they're listening to you versus who plays what they just know and they will keep playing it the same way. So sometimes I've done certain gigs where I really love the change brought out, but then sometimes I hear it and I'm like, because I studied so much harmony, I just look, I'm like, you know what you did makes no sense. Why would you do that? Are you doing it because you heard me going somewhere, or you did it because your fingers just took you there? So in terms of how to react to it, I think it's important to be able to identify what musically makes sense. First of all, if I'm playing with piano and guitar players, usually I will tell either one of them to keep quiet when I take a solo. So on the gig, if I hear them both comping, I'll tell the piano player, man, just cut it out. Just leave me alone with the guitar player. Or I'll sometimes tell the piano player, you play, you keep quiet now. Because when it comes to bass solos, nobody comps for you properly. Nobody. And I can even sit and count. Very few guys can really play to bass solos. And most of them, when you comp, they'll be here playing these very small Tinkerbell chords. That's what I call them, because it doesn't support the bass. Because the bass is so powerful. You play a melody like this, and they play the chord. It's like, why are you afraid? Play it here. Maybe even play it here. Maybe here. Just be more confident in actually accompanying the bass player. So it's funny because a lot of this is actually a lot more psychological than anything else. But in terms of being able to react to extensions, the only way you can actually develop that skill is to practice your extensions. So if you have, let's say, C major 7, okay, you have your 9, sharp 11, 13. These are the most accessible extensions you have on major 7. But sometimes you have this. This is a C major 7, sharp 11, sharp 9. Or a polychord. This is C major over B major. Yeah. So I remember the first time I heard this chord was on a Chick Corea album, and I always thought, man, it'll be cool if somebody actually knew these voicings that would use it on a gig. And then I played with a good friend of mine, great piano player, Mahesh Balasurya, uh, plays with Stanley Clark and Arturo and all those kind of guys. He was here in Dubai, and we actually recorded together and we did some stuff. We were shedding a lot. And he used these voicings quite often, but he used it so musically, that it was so nice to listen to it. And sometimes, even when it's musically presented well, when I'm soloing, I actually sometimes stop just to appreciate the moment and then I continue. Some people say it's dramatic, but it's like, I don't know how to explain it, but it hits you on a very emotional level when somebody places that chord at the right spot. It's just like, everybody has the face. So for me, I like I said, I try to evaluate how much of the substitution makes sense, how much of it doesn't. If I keep hearing the same substitution over and over again through the night, I just ignore it. I just keep playing what I want to play. If it makes musical sense and the guy is challenging and pushing me, I will push myself. So that's the way I would do it. Yeah.
Как ты строишь свои занятия? Снимаешь различные соло или, может быть, работаешь над соединением определенных аккордов?
Um, Before, I never transcribed a lot. People think I've transcribed like hundreds of solos. I've only transcribed like 8, maybe, and some of them not even fully, because I just become lazy once I figure out what they are doing. So when I transcribe, yes, I learn to play some of them, but I try to focus more on what the information is actually about. How are they making these connections? People always say you got to practice your arpeggios, but on the bass, people say, okay, C major, cool. But where is the music in there for me to improvise? So, one thing I started practicing a lot, I still practice this, and I think anyone who practices this will practice it till the day they die, is permutations. Because permutations makes it impossible for you to have a fixed way to practice improvising, which is great because if I have an arpeggio with 4 notes, I have what? 24 combinations of playing those four notes. If I add a fifth note, it makes it 120. A sixth note makes it 720. So a seven note scale, 5040 combinations with seven notes only. If you take chromatic scale, it goes into the millions. So even if I try to do maybe 10 permutations a day, it gives me so much leverage in terms of how my fingers move and how I can practice these arpeggios and scales. Um, so it's basically taking these ideas of permutations and then approaching it like Hanon. Every person who studied classical piano knows the. So if I have a certain permutation, and then just keep playing the permutations, but then not trying to jump around with the shape, like, because this is what bass players would do. They would take the same shape, just keep going up, 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 up. But no, and then maybe shift. So that is just one permutation. That is 1 5 3 7, and that already gives me a lot of sound. Then what I try to do, I take this through chord progressions. So let me do C major 7 to E flat major 7. But then there's a smoother way to do it. See, I can start to change it now immediately once I get comfortable with it. So even just trying to do 2 3 combinations a day, different ones, because there are so many combinations, you can do different ones every day, and you will have refreshing ways of practicing it. So first things first is to just try it against one chord and then add a second, a third, and then keep building it up. Maybe pull out a jazz standard, try to lay it out across the song. So I think this is one of the tools I heard in so many players that I like. Michael Brecker he's a master of this. The way he improvised, you can hear it. He would, not to say he played the same thing over and over. It was like the same 5 6 notes, but he just had too many ways of playing it, because there are many ways of playing it. So that's why I tell people, if you want to get good at music, you have to be pretty good at math. You have to be good at counting, knowing numbers. And I love math. As a kid in school, I loved math. So it's perfect. So I think this for me is a very vital thing to practice if you're looking to be stronger as an improviser. Yep.
Расскажи о том, как ты работаешь с ритмом. Может быть, занимаешься сложными размерами или различными смещениями. Помогает ли игра на барабанах глубже взглянуть на этот вопрос?
Oh, definitely. Um, the way the drumming affects the way I play bass is big time. It's huge. Um, for instance, when you play when you play anything on the drums, at least for me, I know a lot of drummers like to count things. I count too sometimes, but usually I like to feel the rhythm first, because that's how I grew up playing as a kid. When I was playing all these drum beats, I'm not thinking one E and syncopation and that 16th, or quavers. Like, no, none of that was in my head. So that's why I said, when I was in college learning all this stuff, I'm like, I don't understand what's going on, because whatever is being I see on paper, I'm like, I know how that sounds, but I don't get it. So I I used to take a lot of time to practice rhythm, um, but there are a few things that helped me. So one is obviously playing drums. The second is in school. I studied in an Indian international school, and part of the music program is South Indian classical music. Now, anybody who knows a lot of the fusion stuff, from John McLaughlin or things like that, the influence of Indian classical music. It's all rhythm. But as a 6-year-old boy, I hated it because it's so difficult. It's so hard. Um, but now it makes so much sense, musically speaking, and how much it actually strengthened my rhythm without me realizing it. So sometimes, you know, even from a composition point of view, I might write a section that is in 21/8, but I never thought of 21/8. I just have an idea, and it just happens to be that, and it sounds good. It sounds good. So I always kept an open mind that way. So, but I would say this: if you're trying to develop your ability to play odd meters or odd subdivisions, I think the best way to practice it is to actually compose exercises instead of sitting and saying, okay, take your scale and play it as, instead of doing just that, try to compose an etude. Let's say, okay, I'm going to write a 16 bar etude in the key of C, only quintuplets, and just write it. Just sit on with a piece of paper or whatever, write it, and then learn to play it. This is what I did a lot. And this is also what I did for building my melodic vocabulary. If I have an idea, I will try to sit and compose, because when you compose, you put so much thought to it, which is what makes composition nice. That's why we appreciate compositions, because it's somebody's thought and heart and soul. When you improvise, be it rhythm or melody, the composer element disappears because it's real time now. So, how do you try to approach improvising like a composer? You just have to sit and compose. So, even on my albums, the solos I played or the rhythmic ideas I threw together, they were fairly composed. I already had an idea of my solos rhythmically and melodically where I want to go, have a very specific way of laying it down, and then I'm able to execute it. So, the tricky thing with rhythm is that most people practice rhythm without context. And by that, I mean there's no melody involved. That's the problem. That's why it makes sense. You want to practice, let's say, quintuplets or septuplets or different subdivisions or odd meters. You just compose using just that subdivision, or just in 7/8. Just compose ideas, compose bass lines, and learn to play it. And then eventually play it with a click, a metronome, and then really make it solid. And then you just get better at it.
То есть ты специально не занимался канаколом, например, как Джон Маклафлин, которого ты упомянул. Джона так впечатлил канакол, что он довольно много времени уделил этой ритмической традиции.
No, because it's for me it's a trap, because it's like, I always tell a lot of my Indian friends, because they have this love for fusion, and I always tell them, there's a difference between fusion and confusion, because a lot of times music starts to become a sport. I hate that. It's Music is supposed to be fun. People are supposed to connect to it, not make a competition out of it. And the other thing with rhythm is that after a certain point, it's so obvious what you're using, what kind of tools, what kind of conical systems, how are you phrasing. I can sit and mathematically break it all down. And the other problem is when you hear a song, like for me, a good example of somebody who uses rhythm in a very musical manner is Avishai Cohen, the bass player, right? He's got so many odd meters, but the melodies they sing, they're so sweet. If I play that song, let's say to my brother who is in banking and loyalty, he doesn't know music. He will sit and listen to it. He doesn't know it's a 13 over this or that quintuplet going there. No, because it's music first. Um, so I think there is a big trap in going down the rhythmic road. However, when I write, like I said, I have a lot of odd meters. I use a lot of odd meters. Sometimes my mind just goes only there. Sometimes I play purely in quintuplets. When I improvise too, in a jazz gig, in a swing context, sometimes I get bored playing eighth notes. Then I decide, if I'm going to take a solo, I'm just going to play fives all over the place. Um, but if I dedicate time for that purely and I keep practicing that, I'm just going to become a rhythm machine. There's no more music involved. So, um, of course, for different people, it's subjective. For me, I didn't practice this much because I'm originally a drummer. So it's already in my system, but it doesn't mean it's easier to do it on the bass or something. No, it still requires work, but it helps. So for somebody who doesn't play a percussive instrument, I would say practice it, but dedicate less time to it and more time to melody and harmony. And then eventually you will start to understand how to musically bring rhythm into the equation, how to use the conocole without sounding like you're using the conocole, for example. you know because that's the last thing. If you think of it from a compliment point of view, I remember once years ago when I was living in Malaysia, my friend came to see me, and she's like, "Hey man, nice set, nice licks." She told me nice licks. Honestly, I got so offended because I was just like, "How can you say that? I'm working hard and I'm trying to build my vocabulary, and then here you say nice licks." You know why? Because this is all I was playing. this is a lick. It is. She was actually right. I was taking Charlie Parker, copy, paste, rhythmically the same. The swing was the same. And then I realized, man, something's not right in the way I'm doing this. So I decided to change my overall approach to the way I started practicing. So instead of copy pasting, I would just say, okay, the idea is cool, and then forget about it. Just throw it on the side. So rhythmically, that is a huge trap. You know, for instance, a lot of musicians are into the whole, the Tigran Hamasyan kind of thing. The whole. It's nice, but after a certain point, if it's the same thing over and over and over and over and over, for me personally, as a musician, I get bored. I cannot imagine as a listener how people would feel. So I have used these kind of grooves. It's even there on my first album, but I only had it in one section. It's just there in one part for like 20 seconds, and that's it on the whole album. But it comes from knowing konokol and playing drums. So rhythmically, I put thought to it, but just there. That's what makes it special, because it's just there. If you want to listen to that part, you have to go to that song. So that's the composer trick I use. I use certain hooks rhythmically, and I'll place them at a spot in a song somewhere where I know people will like it. But if they want to listen to it again, they're going to have to listen to the whole song. So it's a good way to bring people in. Yeah.
Расскажи о своем подходе к импровизации. Будет здорово, если ты покажешь небольшой пример того, как ты обыгрываешь аккорды.
Hmm. Okay. Um, let's say I have two chords. One is like A flat major 7 to E minor major 7. Okay, now first of all, me doing E minor major 7 is just a substitute for E flat altered. So actually, the chord progression is just 1, 5, but changing the bass to this makes it sound more dramatic. So, first things first, I like to identify between two chords, even if they are in the same key, is the common notes. That's the first thing I try to find, because that's where I start to create my roadmap. So, if I have this is A flat major, so and then E minor major 7 is E melodic minor. Okay, now common notes, I have G, I have E flat. That's it between the two chords. So I could do so even harmonically you can hear that change, just me playing these two notes. So then I start to look at the notes that are changing. So A flat major has A flat, B flat, C, and D flat. Now A flat and B flat will become A and B. The D flat will stay, and then you still have the E flat. So now I'm starting to create this map in my head. So what I do was, and I used to do this on the piano again before, very slow, because I couldn't play chords well before, is I'll just take and just keep building it. So start with the common notes and then start to play the notes that are actually different between them. So this is common notes. Sorry, my chords are funny today. There we go. Now the different notes. And then I start to string them. So common into uncommon. So it's like, okay. That's why when you hear piano players play, it's like, we listen to that as bass players, we go, shit, how do you do that? But this is the way to do it. It's just having an understanding of what actually brings two chords together. Because any chord you take, no matter what, they will be connected. Right now, if I ask you, just give me any two root notes, just any two notes.
Ре и ре бемоль.
Okay, D flat and D. If I did D flat minor 7, okay, to D minor 7, now all my notes will change in the chord. It's going up a half step. If I did D flat major 7 to D minor 7, only two notes are changing, D flat and A flat, because that'll become D and A. So if you take, I don't know, D flat minor major 7 to D minor 7, that doesn't sound bad. Why? Because you can always find at least one way to connect two chords, regardless of their tonality. So now the hard part is obviously to translate this through 20, 30 chords. That's where the work comes in. But if you do it with just two chords, really trying to understand what actually makes them the way they are, because right now I just did a chord on D flat and then a chord on D, but I could treat the D flat like this. Or let's see. I can just keep changing the tonality, but try to find every way to make these two notes make sense of each other. So, of course, you will notice this is very time consuming to do, especially if you cannot really play the piano. And on the bass, it's hard because you can only play either the scale or the chord. You cannot do both at the same time, which is why I prefer to go to the piano and I force myself to learn my left hand voicings just so I can try these things out. You have that flexibility. You have 10 fingers on the bass, you just have four practically. That's it. So I would definitely encourage any bass player to go to the keys and try it because, again, it gives you an idea of what happens when you move your root notes around. What makes it sound good. So these two chords I just said, A flat major 7 to E minor major 7, I could do it like this. I can change it up. And then, so now those two chords have become 8, and then the fun part is I can still keep playing the same melodic ideas, but I can change the harmonic structure of it. So if I can do that, I can do the opposite. I can change the melodic idea and keep the same harmonic structure. And this is what I think is outside playing, what I feel it is. Because people think, oh, you just take a chord, move it up a half. That's outside. No, that is not outside. That is just you taking the same thing up a half. And again, it becomes like a lick. It becomes autopilot. You just keep doing that. So that is not improvising anymore. That is just, it works, copy paste. So yeah, this is the way I would do it. Common notes and then uncommon notes and then connect them between each chord. And just, you don't have to shred, just play those notes very nice and slow so you can really hear what it sounds like. People talk about Chet Baker. He was a king of doing these kind of things. A lot of the lyrical improvisers, they do this. And the best thing is they can keep doing this for 30, 40 years and you will still listen to it because it's so tasty. It's so much better than the guy who can play 200 Charlie Parker licks. It's always going to be better. So, yeah, hope that makes sense.
Мог бы ты показать, как ты работаешь над обыгрыванием одного аккорда?
Sure. Let me see. You know what? I'll just probably improvise in a key, if that's okay. Yeah.
Окей.
Let me see. I haven't played this bass in a while. Cool. So this is something I do to just find how much I repeat myself and then try to fix that. That's why I like to practice things in a key. So if I'm playing something, let's say G flat major,
Супер. Сейчас ты живешь в Дубае. Почему ты выбрал именно этот город, а не поехал, например, в Америку или в Европу? Кстати, ты прекрасно говоришь по-английски. Ты где-то специально обучался языку?
Uh, so first off, why Dubai? I initially moved here because I didn't have any other options. That's one of the problems of having a very bad passport. Um, you don't have too many options. So that's why I moved here because my brother was here. But I've grown to like it um, because it's very international overall, generally speaking. As far as English goes, I was raised in an environment. One of the things about growing up in the Middle East, you have all kinds of people here. In Dubai, there's a lot of Russian people. So I always picked up a, privyet or spasibo or something, just here and there. I just pick up a few words and some words I should not say. So um, that's the fun thing about being here. But I grew up in an environment where my mother tongue is Tamil. My father, it was rule number one from the beginning: talk to him in English and Tamil with my mother. So that way, we are always exercising the English, because if you always spoke your mother tongue, especially for abroad, it doesn't really help. So that's how um, my English, I developed it, and of course in school. But I'm still learning, a bunch of new words. Um, but yeah,
Спасибо огромное, Энтони. Я очень рад, что нам удалось пообщаться.
my pleasure. I'm glad. I'm glad. Mm.